Before Apocalypse Now became a towering cinematic landmark, it was an ambitious adaptation of Heart of Darkness, reshaped into a Vietnam War epic by writer John Milius and handed off to Francis Ford Coppola at the height of his creative power. What started as a bold filmmaking venture quickly unraveled into one of the most chaotic productions in Hollywood history. Between a collapsing script, a lead actor's heart attack, and real helicopters flying off mid-scene to join combat, the movie teetered constantly on the edge of disaster. But through sheer will and a touch of madness, Coppola delivered a surreal masterpiece that blurred the line between war film and fever dream. Decades later, Apocalypse Now still haunts audiences and inspires filmmakers. Let's dive into the wild, untold stories behind its creation. Coppola risked everything. Francis Ford. Coppola poured so much of his own money into Apocalypse Now that he nearly went bankrupt funding the film. When backers started bailing out, perhaps spooked by the outlandish scale of the production, Coppola refused to shut the project down. Instead, he risked everything he owned, including his house and his budding wine enterprise. Imagine the psychological toll of waking up every morning knowing you might lose your home if shooting went wrong. This was no ordinary gamble. This was a raw, all-or-nothing bet on a movie that had every chance of collapsing under its own ambition. Many nights, Coppola reportedly couldn't sleep, consumed by the pressure of making a film that was rapidly spiraling into unpredictability. And yet, despite the sleepless nights and financial tightrope walking, he soldiered on, blazing a trail of cinematic innovation in the process. Origins with Milius and Lucas. The origins of Apocalypse Now are wrapped in a back-and-forth collaboration between John Milius and George Lucas, two names that would become legendary in Hollywood. Milius wrote the initial script, and in a parallel universe, Lucas might have directed it. But destiny took a different path when Star Wars summoned Lucas to a galaxy far, far away, leaving the directorial reins open. Coppola stepped in and saw potential for something even more nightmarish than what Milius had created. Where Milius's version was already stark and intense, Coppola infused a deeply personal exploration of existential dread, war, and madness. This pivot propelled the story away from being a straightforward war script and into the realm of psychological horror. The philosophical and dreamlike nature of the Vietnam conflict provided a strangely perfect canvas for Coppola's darker creative impulses. Instead of just telling another war story, he aimed to draw the audience into a slow-motion nightmare that forced them to question the very fabric of morality and sanity. Harvey Keitel replaced by Sheen. Casting can make or break a film, and Apocalypse Now was no exception. Interestingly, Martin Sheen was never the first choice for Captain Willard. Harvey Keitel originally snagged that pivotal role, but the friction between Keitel and Coppola reached a boiling point fast. They parted ways after only a brief stint of shooting, which created sheer panic behind the scenes. Time was ticking, and the production was already draining funds at an alarming rate. Coppola needed a new Willard fast, so Martin Sheen was brought on board, practically in a flurry of last-minute negotiations and hastily rewritten schedules. This frantic casting switch speaks volumes about the film's borderline chaotic environment. Sheen himself later admitted he felt thrown into the deep end of a colossal, high-stakes production. Yet in that trial by fire, he discovered facets of his own emotional range he never knew existed, ultimately delivering a performance that would sear itself into cinematic history. Filming in the Philippines. One of the big draws for filming in the Philippines was cost-saving. At least, that was the original plan on paper. In reality, choosing that location became a swirl of new expenses and mind-blowing complications. For starters, the Philippines was mired in a volatile conflict with local rebels, so the government's help in lending military helicopters came with serious strings attached. The same helicopters used for the film's intense combat scenes would sometimes fly off mid-shoot to engage in real military operations, leaving cast and crew staring into the sky in disbelief. The unpredictability didn't end there. Equipment would break, roads were difficult to traverse, and local logistics became a constant puzzle. Production often felt like a miniature war in its own right, with all the uncertain alliances, resource shortages, and last-minute tactical changes that come with the territory. The decision to shoot there turned out to be far from economical, but it gave the film a gritty authenticity that money simply can't buy. Nature fights back. The fierce winds and torrential rains demolished carefully built structures, forcing the crew to stop shooting for weeks on end and rebuild everything. Each day the production was on hold meant more money evaporating from an already strained budget, intensifying Coppola's sense of doom. The storm was so destructive that some team members questioned whether Mother Nature herself was trying to halt this project. Crews braved ankle-deep mud and unsteady scaffolding to resurrect the damaged sets. Nonetheless, the team pressed on, determined to defy even the forces of nature to realize Coppola's tumultuous vision. Martin Sheen's heart attack. Martin Sheen, who suffered a near-fatal heart attack at just 36 years old on set. The punishing schedule, relentless heat, constant physical challenges, and high-pressure environment conspired against his health. When he collapsed, it was a gut-wrenching moment of reality, intruding into a project already flirting with the brink of disaster. Coppola feared not just for Sheen's life, but also for the future of the film if the studio got wind of this medical emergency. Hastily, they tried to keep the news under wraps. Crewmates whispered about how easily the entire production could be shut down for good if insurers or investors learned the star was out of commission. In this moment of crisis, Sheen demonstrated remarkable resolve, returning to filming when most people would have been ordered to bed rest for weeks. Willard's hotel meltdown was real. One of the most iconic moments in the film's opening is that dizzying scene of Willard's meltdown in a hotel room. Martin Sheen was genuinely drunk while filming, aiming to capture Willard's despair as authentically as possible. Look closely. When Sheen punches a mirror and it shatters, he slices his hand for real. That blood isn't a prop, nor was his anguish an act. While shooting, Sheen lost himself in the moment. The cameras kept rolling, and Coppola let it ride, capturing raw, vulnerable, almost voyeuristic footage. On top of that, Sheen's deep frustration spilled out in front of the entire crew. This was method acting at its most extreme, with the actor literally bleeding on screen. Brando's surprise transformation. When Marlon Brando finally showed up on set, he was sporting a much heftier physique than expected, far from the lean, imposing figure that Coppola had imagined for Colonel Kurtz. This threw a monumental wrench into production. Suddenly, wardrobe had to be overhauled, camera angles had to be rethought, and entire lighting schemes were reconfigured. Coppola realized that highlighting Brando in broad daylight would reveal all the weight he'd gained, undermining the image of a menacing renegade officer lurking in the shadows. So they plunged Brando's scenes into near-total darkness, wrapping him in shadow and mystery. The result turned out to be a stroke of cinematic genius. Brando's Kurtz radiated an otherworldly aura, looming like a vengeful phantom in the gloom. 200 hours of footage. Coppola ended up with more than 200 hours of raw footage when principal photography wrapped, which was both exhilarating and terrifying. He famously confessed that he felt lost in a colossal maze of film reels, unsure of how to carve a coherent narrative from such excess. The director's wife, Eleanor Coppola, was quietly chronicling her husband's struggles as well as the collective despair in her diaries. These candid accounts, later transformed into the riveting documentary Hearts of Darkness, A Filmmaker's Apocalypse, reveal sleepless nights spent sifting through endless takes, rearranging scenes, and battling self-doubt. Editing Apocalypse Now was akin to facing a giant jigsaw puzzle with pieces that could form multiple pictures, each drastically different in tone. How do you make a clear statement about war and madness when your own mind is battered by stress and confusion? Hopper versus Brando tension. Dennis Hopper's presence on set was as electrifying as it was chaotic. Portraying the photojournalist, a character living in the thrall of Kurtz, Hopper brought an unpredictable energy that both enriched and destabilized the production. His notorious fondness for mind-altering substances turned him into a live wire, perpetually on the edge of mania. Marlon Brando, a methodical performer in his own right, found Hopper's erratic behavior intolerable. Rumors swirled that the two clashed constantly, generating an undercurrent of tension that mirrored their on-screen dynamic. Kurtz's unsettling stillness opposed by the photojournalist's frantic reverence. At times, it seemed their real-life friction was fueling the film's intensity, infusing authenticity into their scenes together. That uneasy chemistry between them offered a strange kind of magic, capturing the sensation of individuals spiraling into moral freefall in the heart of the jungle. Constant rewrites. Apocalypse Now was practically written and rewritten on the fly, a living, breathing beast shaped by on-set discoveries and near-daily script overhauls. Francis Ford Coppola and John Milius volleyed ideas back and forth, sometimes with heated arguments over how surreal or grounded the film should be. Meanwhile, the actors would show up to find new pages of dialogue slipped under their doors overnight, forcing them to pivot and adjust performances at the last minute. While this chaotic creative process frustrated many, it also produced extraordinary moments of spontaneity. When actors are forced to improvise in the midst of real exhaustion and tension, you capture raw, unfiltered emotions that no staged scene can replicate. That sense of anything can happen pulsates through the final cut, blending confusion, discovery, and brilliance in a way that echoes the film's overriding themes of psychological disintegration in the theater of war. Sheen's mental breakdown. Martin Sheen would later describe filming Apocalypse Now as the closest he's ever come to experiencing real warfare, minus the actual bullets. The oppressive heat, the sense of isolation deep in the jungle, the constant threat of natural disasters, and the overarching atmosphere of fear all conspired to break down mental and emotional barriers. Sheen confessed to suffering a genuine nervous breakdown on set, a meltdown that left him questioning not just the movie, but his very reason for being there. He was far from the only one unraveling. Many cast and crew members struggled with a creeping sense that they had entered a world beyond their control. Nighttime gatherings became confessional sessions where everyone vented frustrations, forming a camaraderie built on shared hardship. The result is a film that doesn't just depict madness, it was, in many ways, forged by it. Budget exploded, past $30 million. The plan was to keep the budget around $12 million, but Apocalypse Now torpedoed past that mark, soaring toward over $30 million. Studio executives watched in horror, convinced they might never recoup such astronomical costs on a war movie that seemed increasingly experimental. Coppola was painfully aware that he was playing with other people's money, and his own. The situation grew so bleak that he reportedly threatened to take his own life, an extreme expression of how cornered and desperate he felt. The crushing weight of expectations, the unrelenting daily crises, and the spiraling finances all took a toll. In interviews, Coppola was transparent about feeling that the film's demands were consuming him, body and soul. That desperation bled into the movie itself, lending it a rawness and urgency that conventional, well-managed productions rarely achieve. If ever a filmmaker lived and died with his art, Coppola did so in the crucible of Apocalypse Now. Real water buffalo slaughter. One of the film's most shocking sequences is the actual slaughter of a water buffalo. Yes, that really happened on camera. Influenced by the local Ifugao tribe's traditions, Coppola decided to capture the genuine moment of ritual sacrifice, which sparked an outcry about ethics in filmmaking. To some viewers, it was a bold immersion into the authenticity of tribal culture. To others, it was a disturbing step too far, unnecessarily blending real animal harm with fictional violence. Regardless of where one stands, that scene remains a stark and unforgettable reminder of the film's commitment to unfiltered realism. The moment underscores the movie's central tensions. It's a hallucinogenic swirl of morality, guilt, and brutality, captured in a single visceral image that viewers often find haunting long after the credits roll. Lawrence Fishburne lied about age. It's mind-boggling to realize that Lawrence Fishburne was just 14 years old when he joined the production as Tyrone Mr. Clean Miller, having fibbed about his age to snag the part. By the time cameras finally stopped rolling, well over a year later, he was nearing 16. That's an astonishing transformation to undergo amid the chaos of a film set that mirrored the unpredictability of an actual war. Fishburne got an immersive crash course in acting, adulthood, and possibly the darker side of the human psyche, all before most kids graduate high school. Looking back, he has mentioned how forging his path under such intense conditions shaped him, pushing him to develop a serious dedication to his craft. The fact that he emerged from this crucible with his career and sanity intact is a testament to his resilience and raw talent. Napalm Shot was real and dangerous. One of the film's most indelible images is the colossal napalm explosion that lights up the screen in the opening sequence. Orchestrating that fiery spectacle was like juggling nitroglycerin. The production team meticulously wired explosives across a stretch of jungle, choreographing the sequence so it would detonate all at once in a single breathtaking shot. Coppola insisted it had to be captured in one clean take, both because redoing it would be prohibitively expensive and because he craved a spontaneous authenticity. When the charges blew, the resulting inferno was so massive and brutal that onlookers felt the heat blast. That mesmerizing mushroom cloud of flame ushered viewers into a world where destruction is both horrifying and strangely hypnotic, a savage commentary on the seduction of war. Smell of napalm was improvised. The line, "I love the smell of napalm in the morning," is so ubiquitous now that even people who haven't seen Apocalypse Now can quote it. Interestingly, Robert Duvall's speech was in the script, but how he delivered that line, the rhythm of it, and the offhand swagger were shaped on set. Duvall infused it with a sense of casual authority, transforming a short piece of dialogue into an emblematic catchphrase. The mesmerizing contradiction of a man standing in a war zone, calmly savoring the aroma of destruction, captures the lunacy that the film explores. Duvall later admitted he was amazed by how fervently fans would repeat the line to him, as though it were a comedic punchline rather than a chilling reflection of the absurdities of combat. Brando got $1 million up front. Marlon Brando's demands for this project extended beyond script changes and dark sets. He insisted on being paid a staggering $1 million up front before filming a single scene. Then, to complicate matters, he arrived with limited knowledge of the script, preferring to unravel Kurtz's psyche in real time. Coppola found himself wrestling with a legend who questioned nearly every directive, sometimes halting filming to engage in philosophical debates about the nature of Kurtz. This could have been a recipe for pure chaos, and, in truth, it often was, but from those volatile clashes arose a performance so haunting that it justifies every tantrum. Brando managed to transform Kurtz into a figure half shaman, half villain, as though he had tapped into a primal consciousness the rest of the crew could barely fathom. Despite the tension, the synergy of Coppola's direction and Brando's improvisation forged a cinematic enigma that remains enthralling to this day. Willard's rise from the river. The scene where Captain Willard surfaces from the murky water, face streaked with camouflage paint, has become one of the film's most iconic visuals. Yet this eerie emergence was almost an afterthought, sparked by Coppola's spontaneous recognition of how mesmerizing light and darkness played across the water at dusk. He directed Sheen to move slowly, letting the water drip from his face, creating an image that encapsulates the primal transformation Willard undergoes. In that moment, Willard becomes both predator and prey, teetering at the threshold between sanity and delirium. The effect was so potent that it inspired countless homages in subsequent war and action films. But it's not just a flashy image, it's the perfect illustration of how Apocalypse Now used improvisation and intuition to capture fleeting moments of visual poetry that speak louder than any dialogue ever could. It was Vietnam. Quote, "During a particularly candid moment with the press, Coppola proclaimed that Apocalypse Now wasn't just about Vietnam. It was Vietnam. The chaos, the mission creep, the looming despair, and the sense of moral quagmire all mirrored what the United States experienced during the conflict." That statement, while grandiose, reflected the ungovernable nature of his own production. Every day on set felt like venturing deeper into the unknown, with everyone questioning who was truly in control and what exactly they were trying to accomplish. While bold statements can sometimes be dismissed as Hollywood hyperbole, this one rang true for cast and crew alike. They were living out a parallel saga of ambition, fear, and existential questioning that turned a film shoot into a war zone of the psyche. Ironically, the statement also fueled more intrigue, making people wonder whether the final film would be a towering masterpiece or a notorious fiasco. Shoot lasted 16 months. The original schedule estimated 6 months of filming, but in true Apocalypse Now fashion, it stretched far beyond that, ultimately devouring 16 months of grueling production. Cast and crew joked that the film should be renamed Apocalypse Forever. Some were convinced they'd never see the project completed, imagining they'd remain captive in the Philippine jungles for all eternity. This prolonged timeline wasn't just expensive, it was emotionally draining. People missed weddings, birthdays, and even the births of their children. Some relationships reportedly disintegrated under the weight of indefinite separation. The length of the shoot turned Apocalypse Now into a way of life rather than a mere job. By the end, those who remained felt they had survived an epic pilgrimage that they would talk about for decades to come. Real soldiers as extras. For added realism, actual members of the Philippine military were cast as door gunners in the helicopter assault scenes. This move was partly a matter of convenience. Coppola needed men who knew how to handle heavy artillery and replicate military movements on camera, but it also birthed an unsettling undercurrent of authenticity. In some instances, these very soldiers had reportedly been engaged in combat duties earlier the same day, swapping out real bullets for cinematic ones. That eerie overlap between fiction and reality supercharged the footage, capturing the sense that you were peering into genuine warfare. The fact that these military helicopters sometimes vanished mid-shoot to deal with rebel skirmishes only hammered home the bizarre synergy between cinematic creation and real-world conflict, a hallmark of Apocalypse Now that sets it apart from other Vietnam War films. The End, by The Doors. Music plays a critical role in establishing the film's haunting, dreamlike atmosphere, and Coppola's decision to use The Doors' The End was a masterstroke. Jim Morrison's vocals, drenched in existential dread, seemed tailor-made to accompany the swirling images of chopper blades slashing through a hazy orange sky. The track casts a psychedelic pall over the film, as if the jungle itself pulsates with cosmic dread. Its lyrics echo thematic currents of death, transformation, and moral freefall, aligning too perfectly with Willard's journey to confront Kurtz. Ever since, whenever listeners hear those opening chords of The End, many can't help but visualize flaming tree lines and the flicker of helicopter strobes, so deeply did Coppola etch that association into pop culture's collective consciousness. Nighttime bonding on set. For all the friction, arguments, and near breakdowns, Apocalypse Now also sparked remarkable camaraderie among the cast. Whether it was Martin Sheen, Frederick Forrest, Sam Bottoms, or Albert Hall, these actors endured a crucible together that few other productions have matched. At night, they gathered under the ghostly glow of lanterns, telling stories, sharing their frustrations, and bonding over the shared adversity of a production that seemed to devour normal life. Friendships solidified in the sweaty hush of the Philippine night as people confided their worst fears, that they'd never see home again, that the film would collapse, that the madness was seeping too deeply into their real selves. Out of these confessions emerged a tightly knit ensemble whose chemistry on camera felt tangibly authentic. The sense of shared hardship translated into performances that bristled with life and tension, forging a cinematic tapestry that was as much about off-screen survival as on-screen drama. Coppola cried watching Brando. A widely circulated rumor suggests that some nights Francis Ford Coppola would watch raw footage of Marlon Brando's improvised monologues in the dark, drinking wine while tears crept down his cheeks. Sometimes these tears sprang from awe at Brando's brilliance, a sense that the veteran actor was tapping into wells of subtext that no script could fully capture. Other times, Coppola felt despair, believing Brando's ramblings were too incoherent to mold into a cohesive narrative. That sense of vacillation, of being perched between revelation and ruin, is emblematic of the entire film. When you're working with uncontrollable creative forces, the difference between gold and garbage can come down to the slightest nuance. Brando's approach forced Coppola to become part detective, part priest, and part psychiatrist, mining the footage for lines that revealed Kurtz's fractured genius. Kurtz's temple felt haunted. The ancient-looking temple compound that served as Colonel Kurtz's lair was constructed deep in the jungle, creating an eerie atmosphere that lingered after dark. Crew members whispered about faint voices in the undergrowth, drifting lights flickering at the edges of their vision, and a subtle sense of being watched by something unseen. Whether it was the local Ifugao tribe's spiritual presence or the collective stress-warping perceptions, the rumors fueled an otherworldly sense of dread. People began to personify the temple as if it were a living entity. At night, some refused to walk near it alone. This spectral vibe seeped into the footage, bestowing the final confrontation between Willard and Kurtz with an almost mythical weight. In a film brimming with surreal elements, the haunted aura surrounding Kurtz's fortress felt uncannily genuine. Ending changed by Brando. In the original script, a full-scale assault on Kurtz's compound was meant to provide the film's explosive finale, complete with raging firefights and epic pyro effects. However, Brando put his foot down, wanting a more intimate conclusion that focused on the psychological dance between Kurtz and Willard. This change may have disappointed fans of large-scale action, but it ultimately became a profound stroke of genius. By making the ending less about spectacle and more about an unsettling exchange of ideas, Coppola heightened the moral and existential questions at the film's core. The quiet tension of Kurtz handing Willard his manuscript, the chanting of followers, the final strike of Willard's blade, It all resonates more powerfully when the grand external battle is replaced by an internal reckoning. That claustrophobic hush in the final scenes forces viewers to contemplate the duality of hero and villain, power and surrender, all filtered through the lens of madness. Eleanor Coppola's Secret Camera. Coppola's wife, Eleanor, played a crucial but often under-acknowledged role in chronicling the insanity behind the scenes. Armed with a handheld camera, she filmed arguments, emotional breakdowns, confessions, and all manner of raw happenings that would never surface in an official press release. Her documentary, Hearts of Darkness, A Filmmaker's Apocalypse, is a remarkable companion piece to the film, revealing just how close the entire project came to disaster. It's one thing to hear rumors of a production spinning out of control. It's another to see the actual footage of a haggard Coppola wrestling with existential doubts, or watch Martin Sheen physically recover from his heart attack. Eleanor's perspective brought a crucial human element to a cinematic legend, exposing the quiet heartbreak and the vulnerable moments typically hidden away from fans. In essence, her work turned the making of Apocalypse Now into a saga nearly as compelling and as harrowing as the film itself. Premiere at Cannes was incomplete. When Apocalypse Now debuted at the Cannes Film Festival in 1979, it wasn't even finished. Coppola was still tweaking the edit, so the version that premiered was a work in progress. Despite that, it won the Palme d'Or, a testament to the magnetic pull of its raw intensity. The film's mixture of disorienting visuals, philosophical overtones, and bold cinematic risk-taking struck an immediate chord. Critics stumbled out of the theater with dazed expressions, some lauding it as a masterpiece, others decrying it as pure madness. Audiences at Cannes were notorious for being difficult to impress, yet they were enraptured by this film's hypnotic grip. It was as if the festival had collectively decided that the line between genius and insanity no longer mattered. What they witnessed was undeniably a landmark in filmmaking. So, what do we take from this epic behind-the-scenes journey? Perhaps a lesson about obsession, perseverance, and the blurred line between art and madness. Through stormy weather, financial ruin, real-life health scares, and a clash of Hollywood titans, Apocalypse Now emerged as a film that isn't just about Vietnam. It's about the darkness within us all, the thin veneer separating civilization from chaos. And that might be why, after all these years, audiences can't look away.